Aloha and mahalo. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Maria.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so excited about coming back to the island, and we can't wait to be there.
Give a little plug for what's in store in terms of who you're bringing with you and the show that you're going to be putting on.
Okay, well, I'm coming over with my Red Hot Louisiana band, who all play with me here on the mainland and around the world. Been with me for many years, and we're going to play on 4 of the islands. We're going to be at the Blue Note in Honolulu. We're going to be in Maui. We're going to be in Kauai, and then we're doing 2 shows on the Big Island. So Red Hot Louisiana Band is a name I came up with after falling in love with New Orleans music years ago and wanting to, incorporate more and more of the sound into my music. So I made that word up to kind of describe the kind of New Orleans flavored blues, R&B, and swamp funk that we like to play.
Nice.
So we're going to be coming with a show. I believe it or not, I recorded Midnight at the Oasis about 43 years ago. It's been 43 years since it was riding at the top of the pop charts, and I've made 40 albums in that time. And of course, we're going to, always include some of people's old favorites like Midnight at the Oasis and other favorites people have from back in the day. But also, I keep making albums at a rate of about 1 a year, so we're going to include a lot of newer material from very recently recorded albums. And the whole show, the whole sort of flavor of the show is going to be very uplifting, upbeat, spirit-lifting music, and it's very danceable. I hope if people like to dance, they'll come with their dancing shoes on or kick their shoes off, one way or the other. And so we're very much looking forward to being on all the islands and bringing some good, uplifting music to people.
It sounds like it's going to be a wonderful time. You mentioned Midnight in the Oasis, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But before your career began, explain how music first entered your life as a passion.
Oh, my goodness, that was so many years ago. Do we really have to? No, I'm kidding. I was a young girl. I grew up in Greenwich Village. I was a young, born to Italian-American parents, and even though I was living in New York City, I got exposed to country music early on. My aunt loved what she called cowboy music. So at age 5, I was listening to Hank Williams and Kitty Wells and all the original country and Western artists, and was singing their songs. The first song I remember singing was "It Wasn't God Who Made Honky Tonk Angels," which was Kitty Wells' answer to Hank Williams' song. And then I as I came into my early preteen years, I started listening to a black radio station at the edge of the radio dial that was playing our early R&B at the time, and that's so I was hearing Muddy Waters and people like that at an early age, Ruth Brown, people like that, and then that early R&B morphed into rock and roll, and I was very much a fan of that, and actually had a girls' doo-wop group called the Cashmeres when I was in high school. And from there I just started noticing that in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a lot of music going on right in the neighborhood I lived in. It kind of a movement that kind of became known as the folk revival of the early 60s, and people in the urban north were discovering a lot of the great American roots music, most of which emanated out of the South. And we were just captivated by, listening to bluegrass and old-timey Appalachian fiddle music and blues and gospel, all kinds of authentic American roots music, and learning to play it and so forth. And so there was quite a scene going on right there on my doorstep, and that just drew me right in and captivated me. And I've been on a journey exploring and learning more and more about American roots music ever since.
It's a great story, and you sum it up really well. And you mentioned some of the Appalachia and other eclectic musical flavors that were going on. Talk about how you ended up in a pair of jug bands, with one leading to the relationship that provided your famous married surname, and maybe you can even explain to folks what a jug band is.
Oh, my God. Well, A jug band is kind of music that sort of emerged out of the rural South in the early 20s, and it was when the people were already playing country blues there on acoustic instruments, but they were also listening to New Orleans ragtime and jazz over the radio and wanted to emulate that sound and incorporate it in their music. But a lot of the people in the rural areas down there couldn't afford like a whole drum set, so they would play the rhythms on washboards, putting thimbles on their fingers and playing washboards, or beating on pots and pans, or anything you could find in the kitchen or out in the yard. Those became the percussion rhythm instruments, and then they couldn't afford a real bass, so they would a big upright bass, so they would blow into a jug, or else play a washtub bass. And believe it or not, that click is Taj Mahal calling me right now on my phone. And because I'm on the radio with you, I'm going to wait and call him back. So I apologize for the beats. But anyway, it was his 75th birthday yesterday, and I called him up and sang happy birthday to him, and he's probably calling me back to thank me. But anyway, he's one of the people, and definitely one of the keepers of the flame, whom I met early on in the folk scene, many, many years ago. But anyway, so there was a sort of a resurgence of interest in jug band music. I ended up being asked to join the Even Dozen Jug Band by David Grisman and John Sebastian, who had formed a band, and we did one recording, and then shortly thereafter I met the Jim Kweskin Jug Band, who were way better musicians than we were and had been doing it a bit longer, and I fell in love with a certain blue-eyed soulful blues singer who also played washboard and other instruments in that band, and his name was Jeff Muldaur, and because my maiden name was Maria D'Amato, and so we ended up making a real connection. I ended up moving to Boston, where they were based out of, and they asked me to join their jug band, and that's how my recording career started back in 1963.
It's an amazing story.
Many years ago.
So Midnight at the Oasis, you mentioned it. Share some stories about recording it, and also it's not a song that you wrote, but it ended up being a staple of your catalog and how you're identified. Undoubtedly, many people who are going to come to see you, they're coming because of the power that song had in their lives. It was written by someone else. You ended up with it and took it to the top. Explain how it all happened.
Oh, my goodness. Well, after being together with Jeffrey for about 9 years and in the jug band together for most of that time, we had a daughter, a beautiful daughter, Jenny May, and at a certain point our partnership, both personal and musical, kind of came to a natural conclusion. He went off to join the Paul Butterfield band. They formed a new band called Better Days. It was a fabulous band, and I who thought I would who was left crying in the driveway as he drove off in a blaze of glory on to bigger and better rock and roll fame and fortune. I thought I'd get a job as a waitress. That was about the biggest vision I had for myself. But I had instead got the opportunity to come out to California and record my own solo album. And that was not something I was sitting around wishing I could do. Gee, if only I could ditch this guy and have a solo career. It was the last thing on my mind, but since Woodstock winters are very brutal, I thought, well, at least it'll be a chance to get out of the snow and blizzard weather here. And so I packed up Jenny and our dog, and we drove across the country, and I found myself in Hollywood and in the studio working with some of the best musicians, all my musical heroes. Anyone I asked for, I got. I love Dr. John, who, by the way, is the one that turned me on to so much New Orleans music. So he was on many and many of the recordings we did. Ry Cooder, David Lindley, Jim Keltner, Clarence White, all, just the best players in town were all included on my record. And I didn't have any plans to make a pop record or a hit record or anything. My biggest aim was to make some studio money and get out of the winter weather. That's the biggest, vision I had. But we were going along, and I just chose an eclectic bunch of songs. In fact, somebody who recently interviewed me said, Maria, you single-handedly invented Americana music. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, look at the stuff they said, you single-handedly invented Americana music decades before anyone gave it a name. I said, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, look at the stuff on your first record. You did a Dolly Parton song. You did a Jimmy Rogers song. You did an old New Orleans blues, Don't You Feel My Leg by Blue Lou Barker. They said you had that was American roots music all over, plus a lot of songs written by contemporary songwriters like the McGarrigle sisters and so forth. So that was an interesting take on what I was doing, because I certainly didn't know what I was doing, but I was just picking songs I liked. That's all I knew. So one of the songs I had picked to do was called I Never Did Sing You a Love Song. It was a beautiful little country waltz written by a young guitar player named David Nichtern, who had been very supportive of me when I found myself single, and he had been very encouraging in telling me and encouraging me to step out and become a solo artist. And he would accompany me. We'd play little coffee houses and so forth. So he was so excited that I was going to record one of his songs that he drove out in the dead of winter in his little VW Bug in hopes that he might be able to be allowed to play rhythm guitar on the song he had written. Because after all, with David Lindley and Ry Cooder and all the other big guns on the sessions, he was just hoping for that chance. And
sure.
So he did. And but he'd come to the studio every day, and every time I thought I was falling apart or getting overwhelmed, he'd say, come on now, Maria, you can do this. You're doing great. So anyway, toward the end of the recording, the producer came in one day and he said, I've been listening to the tracks, and I think we're in pretty good shape. We have some up-tempo songs, and we have some lovely ballads. He said, I think if we had one medium-tempo song, I think we'd have a really nicely rounded album. And so he said, can you think of any you'd like to do? And we stood there. I thought for a minute, and I said, well, I looked over at David, and I just sort of was filled with gratitude that he was being so supportive of me. And I said, well, David has a song, I think it's medium tempo. I said, David, play the Midnight at the Oasis, which was a song he had written some months before after spending the weekend on a waterbed with a buxom blonde. That is the backstory of what inspired that song. Okay, and he had played it for me at the time, and I thought it was okay, but I wasn't wild about it. But I thought about it. I said, hey, David, that song Midnight at the Oasis, is that a medium tempo song? He said, yes. He whipped out his guitar and started to play it. I sang it, and the producer said, yeah, well, that's cute. He wasn't wild about it either, but he thought, well, that fills the bill. Do you want to record that? And as a gesture of gratitude towards David, I said yes. So he calls in all these great musicians, and that afternoon we cut the tune. And Dave, the rest is history.
Amazing.
And God rewarded me mightily for that gesture of gratitude toward my friend David. And he put him on the map. It put me on the map. We were up for 3 Grammys in 3 different categories for that song. And that, it's a song that's beloved. I've made in the 43 years since then, I've made 40 albums, and I've had several other Grammy nominations, but that song is beloved worldwide. I can still, recently, believe it or not, I got invited to headline a blues and jazz festival in Borneo, of all places, and which you can't get any further away from home than Borneo. Right. It took me 3 long plane rides to get there. But the point I'm making is that for some magical reason, that song captured people's imagination, and not just in this country, but worldwide. And I'm still known for that song, and I still do it at virtually every performance I do.
It's a great story, and that just shows the power of music, huh? It's such a
Hmm.
universal thing. And all these years later, you kind of pointed it out, the song. So the original music and the publishing, however it works, that stuff you understand better than me. But does the actual original, that recording, continue to provide revenue? I mean, I know it's a
For
huge.
David Nichtern, not for me.
Oh,
This is
okay.
what a lot of people don't know. Uh, it's the writer of the song that gets the by far the lion's share of the money from royalties and from radio plays. There's many. That song was one of the most played songs on the radio for months and months and months. It was on the charts, and then even after it wasn't on the charts, it was one of the most played golden oldies. Guess what? An artist does not get one penny for radio play. Only the writer gets money for radio play. And a bunch of different artists over the years, including people as different as Frank Sinatra and Levon Helm, to name just two, who were both great singers but didn't write songs themselves, tried to get that change in Congress even several times. Jennifer Warnes was part of a movement to do that at one time, and I don't think it's been changed to this day. So the lion's share goes to the writer. After all, his overhead was only a pencil and a few guitar strings sitting on his bed writing the song. And for the artist has to hire a band, pay for the recording, take a band on the road to promote the song, so forth and so on. And but not that I'm complaining, because it certainly was a huge boost for my little career, and it just made it so that I didn't try to duplicate having big hits on my subsequent albums, because really, as I mentioned earlier, my motivation was never fame and fortune or
Right.
pop stardom, but always the exploration of American roots music. So on my second solo album, for instance, I did some big band stuff with the late great jazz giant Benny Carter and an all-star big band. I invited my old friend Doc Watson and his son Merle Watson out from North Carolina to help me record an old-timey Appalachian song called Honey Babe Blues. I did a Skip James blues, and I just have continued to mix it up like that from that day to this.
Well, that's a great Americana, and that other story you told about somebody identifying you as doing it before there was a term for it. Some of your stories certainly connect you to the reality of that, and there's no question. That's a great explanation too about the truth behind when you have a big hit like that, and some of the logistics of it, and the writing being. The writer, rather, ending up with the lion's share. Fascinating, and a lot of insight. All this Americana talk, it wouldn't be right to mention another association of yours, which happened later in your career, and certainly an enduring one. And that is through, I guess, opening for the Dead, you ended up becoming connected enough to them that you ended up being part of Jerry Garcia's group.
Yes, that's right. I had fallen in love with his bass player, John Kahn, and we were madly in love. And he came when the song "Midnight at the Oasis" was first getting popular. I was invited on all the big TV shows like the Johnny Carson show and all those big shows at the time. And John came and played bass with us when I would perform the song on those shows. And anyway, we fell madly in love. And he lived up here in San Francisco, and which is where I'm calling you from, by the way, Mill Valley, California, which is in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. And it didn't take long for me to be totally seduced to come live up here, and so I was living up here with John and his son, and we made a nice little family. And he soon thereafter, Jerry Garcia asked me to join the Jerry Garcia Band, which was a very interesting chapter of my musical life, and it was heaven for me. I love to play tambourine. I'm a sort of serious tambourine player, and there was nothing I loved more than standing between John Kahn and Ron Tutt, who, of course, as you know, was Elvis's drummer. He was always moonlighting with us when he wasn't on tour with Elvis, and they were, to me, like a magical rhythm section, and I was sort of in the middle, playing tambourine, and they had a groove that was just to die for, as they say. So I very much enjoyed playing with them. Jerry had something very special, and maybe your listeners don't know this, but looping back to your questions about jug band, the Grateful Dead started as a jug band. After hearing the Jim Kleskin jug band, we were based on the East Coast, but they heard us, and I think their first band that he had with Bob Weir was called Mother McCrary's Jug.
Right, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all kind of mixed in there.
Well, that's why I brought him up exactly because of their roots, and like you pointed out, if people who don't know, Jerry himself really was a passionate guy when it came to bluegrass and roots and the roads with Grisman.
They had a band called, that's it, Jerry, before he even had the Mother McCrary jug band that sort of was the precursor to the Dead. He was a huge bluegrass player, and so after he got famous in the Dead, he and another band that was an offshoot band that he had with John Conn was Old and in the Way, and he had my good friend Peter Rowan in that band too, and David Grisman, who was originally in the Even Dozen Jug Band with me, and of course the great bluegrass fiddler Vassar Clemens, and they made several bluegrass albums together. And that's another chapter I didn't mention, was that I'm also a passionate bluegrass fan and sing bluegrass and have for many years. That a lot of people don't know this, but before I was in the Even Dozen Jug Band, I was in a band with David Grisman called Maria and the Washington Square Ramblers. I sang lead in a bluegrass quartet. We did a lot of Scruggs, Flatt and Scruggs tunes and Bill Monroe tunes and so forth. And I still love to get together and sing bluegrass with people. In fact, about 9 years ago, I formed a little bluegrass trio with Linda Ronstadt and Lori Lewis, and we did one concert that's kind of legendary. It was just like heaven. Linda, of course, as you know, loves to sing bluegrass as well. And that was a fun experience. And another thrill of my musical lifetime was getting to sing a duet with none other than the late great Ralph Stanley on an album. He did an album of duets with different women called Ralph Stanley and the Clinch Mountain Sweethearts. And I tell you, I played with so many great people in my life, but getting to sing bluegrass with Ralph Stanley was definitely one of the highlights of my musical journey.
You were mentioning Linda. There's another interesting record in 2012. First Came Memphis Minnie, a loving tribute. Can you talk about that?
Well, Memphis Minnie is, for those who don't know, she was a country blues artist. Everybody, like if you ask an audience who's ever heard of Bessie Smith, almost everyone will raise their hand. And rightfully so. But if you ask who's ever heard of Memphis Minnie, just maybe only a handful of the hipsters in the audience will raise their hand. She came out of the Memphis area, originally born and raised in Algiers, just across the river from New Orleans, and she. But she, unlike Bessie Smith and Victoria Spivey and Sippy Wallace and a lot of the early blues queens that sang blues but accompanied with what we would call a jazz band. I mean, they were often backed by people like Louis Armstrong and his band. And they were quite, they were queens and the pop stars of the day and among the first people to ever sell a million records. But, and they performed with beaded gowns and full bands and so forth in theaters and so forth. But Memphis Minnie was like more of a country blues artist. She played guitar. She played bitchin' guitar and wrote and recorded over 200 of her own songs, and was also savvy enough to marry not one but several great guitar players over the course of her life. And she was just a seminal figure. She just was a blues pioneer in her own way. And one of the songs she recorded in 1941 was called Chauffeur Blues. For instance, this might be the most most well-known song that most people have heard of. And if you listen to it, it was really the precursor to rock and roll. And she was a huge influence on me. I first heard her when Victoria Spivey was sort of mentoring me. She was the person that wanted to record the Even Dozen Jug Band. Victoria Spivey was also a contemporary of Bessie Smith's, but one of the probably the first artist I know of to be savvy enough to have her own record label. So she was in New York on the scene. And you may not have heard of her, but if you have any early Bob Dylan records, you might see a picture of him with her on the back of one of his records, because she discovered Bob and recorded him way before Columbia Records did. So
wow.
That's how hip she was. But anyway, she would take me to her apartment and try to find suitable songs for my young little voice. And one of the people she played me was Memphis Minnie on an old scratchy 78, and I fell in love with her music and her singing and what she had to say in her songs right away. And so over the years I got to be more and more of a devotee, and I wanted to pay tribute to her. So I did an album called First Came Memphis Minnie and invited all my blues sisters to participate. So Bonnie Raitt sang a song and played guitar. Rory Block sang one or two songs. B.B. Snow, rest her soul, did an incredible version of In My Girlish Days. Ruthie Foster sang a tune. And I don't know, a couple of others, and I did several on the album as well. And that's the kind of stuff I like to do, to really try to authentically present music of some of my musical heroes, and then not that I could ever top the way they did it, but just hopefully point people in the direction of some of the great musical innovators and pioneers that have come before us, and who formed and informed all the music we think of as pop music now.
You're also on Johnny's Blues, a tribute to Johnny Cash. Had you known him personally?
I never met him. I always loved him, but never had met him personally. But met so many others, I have to say. But I forgot about that. Yeah, that was a good one.
Who was the most, that's a great thing you just said. You met so many of these huge heroes, and sometimes that's some of the most fun parts of anyone's life. And they don't always have to be musical. It could even be an animal. You just never know what it is that pushes someone's buttons. And so when you think of your own incredible, blessed life that you've had, and some of the biggest heroes or just tear-jerking moments of getting to be around someone that you either really love or regard or respect, or maybe a one-time deal, that what comes to mind?
God, I don't know if there's time in this program to
you mentioned some
them all,
highlights, just a highlight.
I'm blessed to, Bob Dylan, of course, I met him early on, and he moved me then, and he still moves me now. Taj Mahal, meeting Bonnie Raitt in 1970, and she was younger than me, but I was just so impressed with how she handled the band and directed her band, and of course her amazing singing and playing. And we've remained like soul sisters ever since. Getting to record with Hoagy Carmichael, I got to record a song he wrote called Rocking Chair that he had recorded way back in the day with Jack Teagarden and Louis Armstrong. And I was recording it with Benny Carter and an all-star big band in L.A. And he came to the session. He was quite elderly at the time, but he came to the session and ended up asking if he could sing harmony with me. And of course we were thrilled and delighted, and that remains one of the most touching and thrilling moments of my life. Getting to go down to North Carolina when I was quite young and staying with Doc Watson and his family and learning to play old-timey Appalachian fiddle from his father-in-law, Gaither Carlton, and just getting to, live there, as a young girl from New York City. I'd never been any farther from New York than New Jersey, right across the Hudson River there, and I could not believe the amazing lifestyle they had down there in North Carolina. They grew all their own vegetables and got together every night. The family would come down through these little trails through the woods and up the mountain and sit on the porch and sing hymns and play music together every night. And that was just just a whole enlightening experience for a little New York City gal like myself. And I still remember it fondly, and it totally informed,
Who
part
you
of what I am musically today.
Right. No, it's great stuff. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun having you in town, and you shared a lot of really enlightening, remarkable, and educational stories.
Aloha, this is Maria Muldaur, and you're tuned to a show that's really worth listening to with my friend Dave Lawrence. It's All Things Considered on Hawaii Public Radio, and please make a pledge of support.
I hope you had a good time.
I did. Thank you for being so interested in all this stuff.
You are quite welcome. I'm giving you a hug and a high five, and maybe I'll get to see you when you're in Honolulu at the Blue Note.
You better come to the Blue Note show. We don't get over there that often. Come on down.
I would like to.
And come up and say hi.
I will do that. I give you a big hug and a high five.
All right.
Thank you for your time, Maria.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.